Welcome to the motherfucking We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Transnational Boxing Rankings Board recently announced, hey boxing fans, happy 2025. The TBRB board is now offering our perspective on the world of women's boxing. You can find our latest rankings on our website. Here is a direct link. Up until now, TBRB really only rated the men. These are divisional rank standings, similar to what you find on BoxRec or Ring Magazine. Somewhat different to what you see via the alphabets. The alphabet organizations have their own top 10 rank standings, but those aren't the 10 or 15 best fighters in a division. Those are just the fighters that are paying them sanctioning fees. And that's why the names you find in those rankings are not unanimous across the board. Whereas what you get from TBRB or Ring Magazine or BoxRec, those are divisional rank standings intended to rank the 10 best fighters or the 15 best fighters in a division, irrespective of where the alphabets might have them. And now TBRB will be doing this for the women. They're following suit. Because BoxRec was already doing this, and so was Ring Magazine. TBRB is doing it now, but it's not really a top 15 or even a top 10. It's a top 5. They're rating the top 5 fighters at a given weight in women's boxing. I think as time progresses, they'll move up to a top 10 or a top 15 over time. But for now, they're just getting started, and this is how it breaks down. Why is this good? Increases the profile of the sport and normalizes the conversation centered around women in boxing. That another entity within the sport recognizes the fighters and their accomplishments and the movement within a division and its fighters. They're just getting started. Rating the top 5 fighters in a division, the ones you should know, the ones you should follow, the 5 best fighters at a weight. Over time, I expect that the list will expand to accommodate that many more fighters. It's a lot of data to tabulate when you're just getting started, but now that they're paying attention, you gotta start somewhere. And they're starting here. The benefit of it all is helping to normalize the conversation. Because at the end of the day, it's all entertainment. That's what it's all for. The ability to entertain an audience with combat. Pugilism. It's 2 guys fighting, 2 girls, or 2 squirrels. It's a basic idea. This helps to give the spectator a pecking order of sorts, a hierarchy, and it's good to see that TBRB has decided to join the party. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, veteran boxing scribe Dan Raphael says PBC is making plans for non-pay-per-view cards, including bringing Tszyu versus Thurman back to life if they win their upcoming bouts and Fundora defense in March. Go back. He says that the PBC are making plans to bring back to life a Tszyu versus Thurman fight, but near as I can tell, it's not PBC paying a bill for none of this. If you're paying attention, Thurman versus Jarvis, which is intended to be a segue to Thurman versus Tszyu. No Limit are the ones doing that. No Limit are the ones paying to make that happen. Not the PBC. Why do you think it's in Australia? What are you saying? That what you're seeing isn't all being masterminded by the PBC. They're not the ones making it happen. By all accounts, it's No Limit Promotions making all of this happen. And the giveaway is that all of these are intended to be non-pay-per-views. You want to pay attention to that. Non-pay-per-views. The first time they tried to make Tszyu versus Thurman happen, here in America, they were going to bill it as a pay-per-view. Now they're saying it's not going to be. Is it because it's going down in Australia? If it happens, is that why? Because if it is, then it's not PBC orchestrating this, it's No Limit Promotions. They're the ones putting up the money to make it all happen. Their resources in the land down under, their promotion, their brand, their fighters. Tszyu, Brock Jarvis. The most that the PBC would be doing in this situation would be using Amazon Prime as a US broadcast partner, but that's it, that's all. All the grunt work, all the real stuff. That's No Limit. The actual promotion. That's No Limit. Not a bad run of fights, depending on how you look at it. That if what all of this is intended to be is an effort to rehabilitate Tszyu after a horrific 2024, to put him in some decent-sized money fights in 2025, then it's actually not a bad run of fights. It's not a bad idea whether Keith Thurman beats Brock Jarvis or Brock Jarvis beats Keith Thurman, when you look at it that way. These are not money fights in America, of course not, but they're definitely money fights in Australia. If Brock Jarvis beats Keith Thurman, or if Keith Thurman beats Brock Jarvis. Moving right into a Tszyu pay-per-view, that does business. in Australia.
Okay, but what was your hang-up before? Semantics?
It's not semantics. The way that Dan Raphael put it, you would have thought the PBC were doing all of this, when it's really No Limit. You're essentially giving the PBC credit for No Limit's promotion.
They're gonna call this one of the PBC shows on the calendar, but is it really?
It's going down in Australia. What do you think that undercard is going to look like? Likely like the Tszyu versus Bakram Murtazaliev undercard looked like. And there were no familiar faces on that card. Not familiar to Americans. It was just No Limit fighters on that show, and it's likely just gonna be No Limit fighters on this one. So is it really a PBC show?
Not really.
Can Keith Thurman, at 36 years old, 3 years removed from the sport, make it past a prospect in Brock Jarvis? It's safe to say that if he can't, his career is over.
I remember after he came off of another long hiatus. He fought Riverside Rocky, Josecito Lopez, suffered a scare in that fight, got hit really hard.
He got wobbled in that fight. That was many, many years ago. And then, like now, he was coming off a long stint of inactivity, but this one is actually longer than that one was.
He was out 2 years that time. He's been out 3 this one.
So how many of you guys out there actually trust Keith Thurman under these circumstances to get the job done against Brock Jarvis, who I will admit is not much to write home about? At the very best, he's a prospect.
And not even the most talented one coming out of Australia.
Do you trust Keith Thurman still has enough left to beat Brock Jarvis? Does he even make it there, or does he pull out once again with some kind of an injury? And what about Tszyu? Who's he going to be fighting? He's coming off a horrific beating to Bakram Murtazaliev. They're going to have to ease him back into activity.
It'll be somebody local, somebody low risk.
Thus, if Keith Thurman is set to spend most of his 2025 south of the equator, all the way down there in Australia, what this move reminds me of is what TJ Doheny did in Japan. TJ Doheny was a champion once, like Keith Thurman was a champion once, and, you know, he was all but done at world level, is what it was. He was all but done. He was just a journeyman. But in Japan, you know, he goes over there, he wins a couple of fights, and he gets a buzz going. That looks like what Keith is doing in Australia. He's trying to do that.
It's smart.
I don't know what they're paying him yet, but I imagine it might be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million or something like that, maybe? Nobody's gonna pay Keith Thurman through the nose to fight here in America. Nobody is.
Somewhere else they might. Somewhere else they are.
It's smart, though still an indicator of the current state of affairs at the PBC, that what was once one of their flagship fighters has been reduced to hitting the road, hitting the bricks.
Take a hike, Keith.
The end game is a Tszyu showdown, the one that was supposed to go down last year. And looking at this and how it's all supposed to stack up, I can't help but think that Tim's entire endeavor into the American boxing scene was an abject failure, because in the end, you ended up going back to Australia anyway.
I don't think he ever should have left.
To fight Keith Thurman, who then became Sebastian Fundora, or to fight Bakram Murtazaliev in Florida. What are you doing?
You're a star where you're from.
It never made sense to me. This makes more sense to me now. These guys should have been coming to you.
You're the box office star. Even if it is in your own country, you're still a bigger name where you're from than they are where they're from.
Guess they finally got their heads on straight. Got the memo. Call them PBC shows if you like, as part of the PBC's regular schedule of fights. By all accounts, it's actually No Limit running things.
At the helm of the promotion.
Finally, in men's heavyweight news, the big plan. Lawrence Okolie will fight in April ahead of a potential heavyweight title shot. At the start of 2024, we all had a very clear image of Lawrence Okolie, only for his image to then change, distort, and grow as the year progressed. In January, we still remembered Okolie as a cruiserweight, long and lean, but as much hampered by these physical advantages as enhanced by them. We remembered as well him flattering to deceive against Chris Billum-Smith, to whom he relinquished his WBO title and feared it would now be difficult for Okolie, on account of that performance and previous ones, to be promoted in a sport famously short on both patience and understanding, as Lawrence has never had much of a fan-friendly style, but that does look to be changing.
Then we heard he had joined up with Joe Gallagher, Manchester's trainer of champions, and that he planned to reinvent himself in a new division, Bridgerweight. The division 24 pounds north of cruiser.
No, the one that nobody watches, that's still in its infancy and therefore lacking depth. Yet for Okolie, all that really mattered was what it represented. A fresh start and a chance to present to the world a different image. Better yet, as well as weighing 223 pounds for his debut fight as a bridger, Okolie also looked spectacular at the new weight, halting Łukasz Rozensky inside the very first round of a fight in Poland. Suddenly, in just a matter of minutes, we had a new image of Okolie. He was bigger, yes. This we had gleaned from the weigh-in, but on fight night, Okolie would go on to provide an image, a fulfilled potential, one he had always teased, but to date struggled to deliver. 6 months later, we then had yet another version of Okolie. This one was bigger still, and now calling himself a heavyweight. Some seeing him weigh in said he was fat and too heavy at 260. Yet Okolie looked as good as ever on fight night. This time he stopped Hussein Muhammad, a 6'5" German, inside of a round, and did so in first gear. Indeed, ease with which he trounced his first heavyweight opponent left those who watched the demolition unable to work out whether now nothing made sense or conversely, everything made sense. When Lawrence came to me and mentioned bridgerweight, I thought it was ideal. Brilliant, said Okolie's coach, Joe Gallagher. The weight for that was 16 stone, and I wanted to see how he performed at that weight. He always said he was drained as a cruiser and that it killed him to make that weight.
Looks like he wasn't lying. He's a lot more explosive now. Lands with more authority.
He made bridgerweight and he got in a ring against Rozensky at around 16 stone, 236 pounds. In the gymnasium for the camp, all of the sparring was done at around 16 to 17 stone. I thought, wow, he's carrying the weight really well. He fought Rozensky and he looked sensational. He was tall, he was upright, and his shot selection was good. He showed good mobility. Then you look at Alexander Usyk, who weighed 16 stone for the Tyson Fury fight in December, and you remind yourself that there are big heavyweights and there are small heavyweights. He'd done everything he could at bridgerweight, really. There was talk of a unification fight, but that didn't happen. So we looked at how he operated at 17 stone against Rozensky and decided he should just move up. For his first fight, I wanted an opponent who was a proper heavyweight, an 18-stone man. I wanted someone tall, someone big, and his last opponent, Hussein Muhammad, ticked off on all those boxes. He was a good amateur, good fighter, could punch, and he brought a bit of fear factor. Before that fight, I made Lawrence watch lots of Lennox Lewis. I had him watch his fights against Andrew Galata and Donovan Rudder. I wanted him to see how he dealt with them, with a good jab and that. That was the plan for that one.
It was a smart move because staying at bridgerweight and unifying titles there, what does that really mean?
What is that really worth? The growth of Okolie in the last 12 months makes for a fascinating case study. Twice the man he used to be, in more ways than one, his reinvention has from the start been something of a balancing act. With the gaining of weight, never an exact science in boxing. While some need those extra pounds to operate at their best, for others it serves only to slow them down and diminish their capacity to spot and react in danger. As for Okolie, 21-1 with 16 knockouts, the signs so far suggests he is a fighter for whom bigger really does mean better. His work on the track continued. His work in the gym continued. Sparring continued. And he's a very athletic kid, said Gallagher. Doing track at 17 stone and then doing it at 18 stone. With a weighted vest on, he was still doing it. Granted, he wasn't hitting the same times, but they weren't 5 or 10 seconds short of his old times. They were only 1 or 2. The effort, the energy, and the recovery was still there, and his punch output was still there. I'm really pleased with him. People criticized him for bulking up, and I've even seen fellow professionals ripping him. You would like to think that they know better. Look at Tyson Fury. Look at Larry Holmes. Not everyone is body beautiful.
Yeah, not every heavyweight is an Adonis.
Of course, for as much as Okolie's move to heavyweight is about loosening his belt and removing the pain of making weight, it is also a commercial and financial decision. After all, it is at heavyweight rather than bridger. Okolie stands to make the kind of money all boxers hope to make during their prime fighting years. It is there, too, at heavyweight, that the 32-year-old suddenly finds himself surrounded by viable big-name opponents, all of whom are just as keen to land lucrative fights in the Middle East. We're looking for a big fight in April, Gallagher confirmed. We're also looking at how the heavyweight division plays out. We're looking at where Fabio Wortley goes with the WBA and Moses Itelma with the WBO. Everybody is getting in position for when those titles become vacant.
And don't forget that Lawrence is with Queensbury now. They got a lot of good options for him.
Lawrence Okolie is in a really good position with the WBC. I think we're one fight away from him becoming mandatory challenger with them, so we're looking at a good fight in April with that in mind. Another fight to give him a challenge. We've mentioned Deontay Wilder. We've mentioned Joe Joyce. We're looking at those types of opponents, names who will most likely give us rounds and generate a bit of fear factor as well.
Both of those guys got fights coming up.
Both of those guys are on a bounce. They're on a rebound. They lost the last time we saw them. Should Okolie get through what will probably be his first true test as a top-level heavyweight in April, the plan then is for the Londoner to petition for a shot at a version of the World Heavyweight title. This, as it stands, is most likely to be the WBC version, but there are others too, and Gallagher, who knows this bizarre business as well as anyone, expects quite the free-for-all in the second half of this year. 100%, he said, when asked if Okolie would fight for a belt this year. Maybe Usyk and Daniel Dubois will have some big unification fight in August or September, and then we'll see what happens with the belts. In the meantime, the sanctioning bodies will be flexing their muscles as they always do and putting pressure on their champions to make mandatory defenses. That will then probably lead to fragmentation of it all. You've got to just be in position to challenge for the belts, and that's what we're focusing on now. I think we're about to see a similar era to the one you had with Tim Witherspoon and James Bone Crusher Smith and Tony Tucker as champions. They were all chopping and changing, and they could all beat each other on any given night. Nobody was able to hold their belt for very long back then, and I think we're heading that way again. He could be right, for if history tells us anything, it is that the heavyweight division is much like a reinvented boxer. It may change its appearance from time to time, but fundamentally, it remains the same.
The takeaway is that for Lawrence Okolie, adding the weight has added to his performance, where for some fighters, it would take away from it.
Why? It's because Lawrence Okolie is a fat kid at heart. Have you seen the pictures of him when he was young?
Some people just function better with some weight on them.
Some people are supposed to have some weight on them. I remember years ago when Star Jones got gastric bypass surgery. She didn't look right. She looked better when she was fat. Look at Lawrence Okolie. He fights a lot better, and he's a lot more entertaining now that he's fat. Added poundage aside, the heavyweight division is still a minefield, even for Lawrence Okolie, who's on the up and up. When there's that much weight behind the punch and a man of that size, anybody can knock out anybody. All they gotta do is get through.
That applies to him just as much as it applies to them.
So he is in the right place to make things happen as a heavyweight. He's fought under the Matchroom banner, then Boxer, now Queensbury. And Queensbury hosts a robust stable of heavyweights. Any number of guys that Lawrence could end up fighting.
Lawrence never seemed all that interesting by himself, but in addition to
what Queensbury already has and stayed at the weight at heavyweight, he becomes more interesting. He keeps knocking people out the way he knocked out Hussein and Rosansky.
Could become a three-weight champion. You know, he was a champion at cruiser. He was a champion for all of 15 seconds at Bridger.
Could become a champion at heavy. It is true. Usyk's got most of the belts now, but he's not going to be around forever. And how long will Daniel be able to hold on to his red belt, his IBF title? Things could change dramatically in the next 12 months, and all Lawrence has to do is get in position.